In the early morning, in the third biggest city in Iran, Isfahan, the sound of explosions rang out in the streets. In the immediate aftermath, Iranian state news agencies reporting 3 explosions near the airport and the 8th Shikari army base. Within an hour, the Iranian spokesperson for space agency said, quote, several drones had been successfully shot down, no injuries reported. So was that the Israeli strike back for an Iranian bombardment of drones, cruise missiles, ballistic ones last weekend, which Iran said in turn was their response to Israel striking their consulate in Syria? Here's Tom Canetti with what we know so far.
The conflict in the Middle East escalates. However, after suspected strikes on Iran by Israel, Tehran has downplayed their importance.
This operation showed the Islamic Republic's authority and the ability of our defensive systems, our people's will of steel and dedication to the revolution.
Iran's state media reported explosions in the central province of Isfahan. Israel had warned it would hit back after Iran fired hundreds of missiles and drones almost a week ago, in retaliation for a strike that leveled Iran's consular annex in Syria.
The sound that was heard this morning in Isfahan was not an explosion. It was the firing of the rockets of the powerful air defense systems at an object in the air, and there was no damage from that.
In Israel, locals are worried about an all-out war breaking out. But at the same time, some believe diplomacy is futile.
Diplomacy is not a real solution for Iran, because Iran said in law they want to kill Israel.
US President Joe Biden has promised ironclad support for Israel, but also urged it to think carefully and strategically before a response that could trigger a wider war.
As Tom reports, ironclad support from Israel. Again, Joe Biden reiterating. Let's go to Jerusalem. Let's bring in Iris Mackley, our correspondent there. Iris, interesting. No official comment from Israel. I guess we get used to that when it comes to operations overseas. But a lot of attention on one word on social media comment of the right-wing security minister.
That's right. Itamar Ben-Gvir, the only person really commenting in public, a one-word tweet. He used a slang word for lame or weak, and that's his response, let's not forget, to a government that he's part of, to a cabinet that he's part of. And perhaps in other times, that would actually be a sacking offence. But Benjamin Netanyahu wants this government to stay the course. It's the only chance he has to stay in power. and so Itamar Ben-Gvir can do that. Even Iran responded to Ben-Gvir's tweet, dismissing him. And I think what's interesting is there's no official response, but we have heard unofficial comments. And these unofficial comments from military analysts and so forth off the record seem to suggest that this wasn't a retaliation, it was a warning. It was a message to Iran that, while Iran had tried to fire 300 missiles and drones into Israel, 99% of them had failed to connect. And when Israel makes a small attempt, a direct attempt, a surgical strike, then it does connect. So that's the warning implicit in today's attack, if it was an attack by Israel, that we have to say, since we don't have a confirmation from here. And I have been hearing and reading some Israeli analysts, not military ones, suggesting that perhaps Benjamin Netanyahu has taken on board all the diplomatic effort to make him think again, or perhaps not to strike. And that's why there was this surgical strike, because he's looking ahead to building an anti-Iran coalition, no matter what the right wing of his coalition government may say.
You've also been keeping an eye on Iranian state TV and how Tehran is dealing with this today. What's coming back from their side?
That's right. Everybody in Jerusalem, I think, keeping a very focused, laser focus on the reaction from Iran, certainly in the first few hours. And what we saw was this. We heard an Iranian official telling the Reuters news agency that there was no need for an immediate response. You could say that's just words, but they did also reopen their airspace a few hours after it had closed, and planes have been flying in and out of Iran today. So I think those two things together made Israeli politicians in Israel breathe a sigh of relief. And I've been watching Iranian television, and what we've seen is a definite downplaying. some of the things that were in our report earlier before you crossed to me, and also a sense that they want, calm scenes, people going about their business as usual, and a sense that Israel has given them with this surgical response some wriggle room to take a step back, and perhaps that's what they are doing. But one thing, Gavin, it may be over for now, or this de-escalation may have begun, but the paradigm has changed because has now been for the first time these open attacks between these enemies, and I think things are different from now on.
Iris, stay with us for the moment. I want to bring in Samuel Ramani from RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute based in London. Good to have you on the programme, Samuel. First of all, just listening to Iris, what is your take on what's going on right now?
It was inevitable that the Israelis were going to launch an attack on Iranian territory, even though many of the Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE were trying to de-escalate. And also there were some warnings from Olaf Scholz's side not to go ahead with it. And the significance of the attack area of Isfahan is quite notable because Isfahan is obviously also a center of some nuclear research facilities that may employ up to 3,000 Iranians. And there's also reports of attacks on Tabriz, where the Shahab 2 and Shahab 3 missiles were produced. So this is very symbolically resonant. It's a warning shot, I think, at Iran not to attempt another attack like they did last weekend.
Interesting when we've had Iris picking up on comments from Itamar Ben-Gvir on the far right of the government saying this was, quote, weak, and getting response from the Iranians on that. So you get a sense of if this is not the starter of what is to come, but if this was the strike, it appears to be comparatively small. And we've got to look at other things. You've touched upon what's in and around the facility, nuclear situation. They've also got to have aircraft manufacturing sites there. Plus, should we read anything into the fact that it is the Supreme Leader's birthday today, the birthday of Ayatollah Khamenei?
Well, I think obviously that symbolism is quite significant too. Again, I think this is a symbolically resonant location. But I think that, Ben-Gvir's criticism obviously reflects a strong view on the Israeli far right, that this was not going far enough. But Netanyahu has a delicate game to play. He was telling Western leaders that he's moving ahead with a much more aggressive offensive on Rafah and Gaza, even as there's been reports that Annalena Baerbock and him had a spat that got leaked to the public about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Netanyahu has also reassured Western leaders at the same time that he's not going to escalate the situation against Iran too far. So to get buy-in on Rafah and to get people off his back on that, he's probably being a little more cautious on the Iranian side. And maybe he doesn't have to worry about the criticism from Ben-Gvir. His political situation has actually improved quite a lot since where it was after October 7th. And some latest opinion polls are showing that he's gaining ground even on Benny Gantz if an election were to be held. So maybe Ben-Gvir's pressure is going to have less resonance now than it may have had 5 or 6 months ago.
That's very interesting. It's the idea that suddenly there's almost a breather for Benjamin Netanyahu after constant criticism, conditional support from allies, the UK, we know, you mentioned the Germans and the Defence Minister, but also David Cameron, the Foreign Minister in the UK, going to meet Benjamin Netanyahu this week, again issuing and urging caution from the leader. What do you think on the other side of that? You talk about a potentially better, if that's the right word, more comfortable domestic position given the pressure that the Israeli Prime Minister is under, but flip reverse, let's go to Iran. Is the country in a better position domestically from this back and forth?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think the Iranians would have faced a domestic reaction to do something after the attack on the RGC facilities in Syria at that scale. And I think they also got a green light that if this war were to escalate to a large extent, they might get some kind of assistance from Russia or some kind of assistance from others. Though, obviously, in Iran, there's some people who claim that the Russians could have done more to stop the Israelis in Syria, and they didn't do that. So Iran probably felt that this retaliation that they did last weekend was a necessary step and one that was relatively low risk. The big question is, what does Iran do now? I mean, Isfahan being targeted is targeting a potential conventional facility. That's not IRGC facility. And if that is something that is a relatively new development, at least in terms of official Israeli action. So it's really Iran's ball now to decide whether they want to retaliate or not. My guess is that they're probably going to continue to heat up the front in Lebanon. We saw an attack coming from the Hezbollah side that injured about 14 Israeli soldiers, the Israelis striking back. And that might be their area of retaliation rather than another strike like they did last time, which fired a lot of drones and missiles in Israel, but very few results militarily.
Iris, to bring you back in on Samuel's point, talking about what will Iran do next, this downplaying that they've been doing today, seems to be as much about reactions as the strikes themselves.
Yes, because if it wasn't about reactions, we could be in a huge escalation right now. So yes, the reactions are important. I have heard an Israeli politician who was formerly in the Mossad, is now in the opposition, and he was saying that Israel has a war in Gaza to fight. It has an escalation, a serious escalation on its northern border. It still has tens of thousands of citizens displaced inside its borders. Iran is for later, he was saying. If you've got three things to do or three fronts to fight on, you may not win on any of them. Better to concentrate on what is urgent, do that and get on with it. And I've heard another analyst saying that the real problem for Israel is that it still has 130 hostages being held in the Gaza Strip, an unknown number of them now dead, that is really its priority, is to return its citizens, and the fact that one of the credit rating agencies just downgraded Israel's credit rating. That's very important too. So those two things are really important, and getting this off the table was what Israel had to focus on.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Iris, thank you. Iris Maklar, correspondent in Jerusalem, and Samuel Ramani from RUSI in London. Thank you both.
Thank you.